Look, don't blame me for the clickbait title. All I did was make a boss for my rage game that tries to track where the player is going to go and tries to kill them with that knowledge. And then as a joke, I pinged Jonas Tyroller and said, hey, should I call my next video I made Will You Snail in an afternoon? And they just said yes. So I said, okay. So with that out of the way, we can start. So in the game Bloody Traplands, a game that has heavily inspired this one, there are occasional bosses that you fight. And since there's no lives or any consequence for dying, really, you don't really fight them, you just... They're kind of lackluster. So instead, I obviously drew inspiration from Jonas Tyroller's game, Will You Snail, where an evil AI is trying to predict where you're going to go and then put obstacles in the way. On Itch, in the game's description, I half-heartedly made a story up about how you're fighting a warlock and you cast a revival spell on yourself and that's why you can't die and you keep being brought back to life. And then I forgot about it. But now that I wanted to add a boss into my game, so I started like I always do, just making up an outline, and I wanted them to look like the opposite of the character. The color palette that I'm using only has so many options in it. And so I just flipped it around and gave the warlock black hair and a really pale skin. I also tried freehanding a crown and it came out really bad. And then I tried again with a reference and it came out much better. And since this character has long hair and it doesn't really have any kind of definition, I gave it this little hair streak, like the character Rogue from X-Men, just to make them a little more interesting. Now, I'm not really an artist, so luckily with this game, the characters are so zoomed out, it doesn't really matter. But I did do my best to make sure the animations made sense with the character. And then to beat this boss, I figured the cheesiest way possible would do just fine. And so you're going to jump on 3 different buttons using the rule of 3. And to make the warlock's attack stand out, I went to look for another color palette that would kind of be the opposite of what's happening in scene already. And the first attempt at the attack that the warlock would use was pretty terrible. And so was the second one. And the third one came out a little better. And then I made it so that the boss would just loop their animations, and then when they hit a certain frame in their animation, they would cast the spell, which would be the attack that they would hit the player with. And then I just had to figure out how the whole predicting where the player is going to be thing would work out. And this took a couple of attempts. The first couple of times it went off screen because sleep deprivation is a real thing and oh boy, I should really sleep more. Anyhow, I didn't create anything nearly as complicated as Will You Snail. I've been following along with Jonas Tyroller's devlogs, and yeah, what I made is not nearly as complicated as that. Basically, mine works on inputs, which is kind of cheap and lazy, but here we are. So if your character is standing still, it'll try to put it where you are. If you're moving left or right, it will try to move it in front of you in that direction. If you're jumping or falling, it'll try to put it above or below you. And then there's a raycast that goes over, so if there's a wall in the way, it'll create the attack at the point of the wall. And considering the kind of game that I was making, it really didn't need to be perfectly accurate to tick you off. Because there are a bunch of little points in the game where you have to wait for the perfect timing, and this is enough to knock you off of that timing. So I ended up mocking up a little level. And unlike the other levels where you're trying to get from one point to the other, this was going to have 3 different points to go to. So it was built a little differently. But it was at this point that... Squirrel! And I just stopped building the boss level and went and put the boss into every other level of the game for some reason. Starting first by trying to put the boss in the foreground, but because of the color palette I'm using, I eventually ended up just putting them into the game itself. Cutting out a square for them in some unreachable part of the map, setting it up so they would attack you just like they would in the boss room. And this is where we get into the like, Jonas could probably sue me if he wanted to, territory of the video, where I now have a boss that is in every level of my game that predicts your movement and tries to kill you in an already difficult rage platformer game. Please don't sue. Anyhow, now that every level had the boss in it, it meant that the boss fight level at the end of the game wasn't special anymore. So, I could have gone through the effort of making more attacks and maybe creating some new events and things, but instead I just Control-Z, Control-V, and ta-da! Now they attack twice. For this boss fight we made buttons, and so I put those in scene, gave them an animation, and got them to add to a final total. So if you jump on all 3 buttons, now the platform on the right is going to fall on the boss. I made the object shake a little bit when you hit a button to tell you that that's what's going to happen. And then I just covered every surface that wasn't being used for something with saw blades and spikes. And then all that was left to do was make the level pretty. And I'm using a set of events to fix the Z ordering, so I was able to just slap things into the scene and not worry about that. And since the boss attacks twice in this scene, I didn't want to overdo it with the traps, because I wanted the boss to speak for themselves. And so I made a bunch of straight hallways that would take advantage of how the boss attacks. And then this middle section here, where you kind of have to watch where you're going, is designed to slow you down enough to make the attacks really noticeable. And from there, the game was done. I crushed the dreams of everybody who spent time speedrunning this game by making a new leaderboard for this version. Sorry. And then I sent it off for some people to playtest. And for the first time, I think, ever, in me making games, it was good. The only issue was that people didn't understand that the boss was a boss. They thought that the boss was some kind of princess that you needed to save. Probably because of the crown. Meh. And so to fix that, I dove into the most powerful tool any game developer has. Particles. Seriously though, all I did was give them a little glow effect and put some particles by their hand when the spell is casted, and instantly everybody knew that's the person that's killing me. So then I resent that off to the public, and everything's good, I guess. I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, be sure to do the whole YouTube thing. And a huge thank you to my patrons. Because of them, my coffee cup is full, and I can even afford sugar. As always, the links to all the cool places that I hang out are down below, and if you decide to click on one, then I'll see you there.